Hey everyone, welcome to CresTV, your regular roundup of all things Crestron, the industry, and we're going to be talking about workplaces today because it's all very well having all this great tech and kit and all the rest of it, but you've got to put it somewhere and people have got to go somewhere to use it. So we've got a guest that we had at our Modern Work Summit joining us on today's episode, Naomi Sakamoto from Gensler. Good morning, Naomi. How are you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having me, Neil.
And is that an office you're in? Tell us, where are you? What's going on?
Yes, this is a very exotic thing called an office. Um, this is our Gensler Europe headquarters in London near St. Catherine's Docks. We have about 250 employees here, and actually, it's really busy today.
Wow. Okay.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, we're pretty round.
So, but what happens on Mondays and Fridays? Is everyone kind of like, working from home in that kind of like, have a bit of a lie-in on a Monday and, leave early on a Friday to go to the pub? What's that all about?
It does tend to be a bit quieter. We do try to schedule our internal meetings Mondays and Fridays, so it's a lot of Zoom. We
Hmm.
still see each other, but in a virtual setting. Interestingly, I like to come in Mondays and Fridays to focus because I
Okay.
have two small children who make our house total chaos, and I find that having a dedicated space to focus has been invaluable for me. I really missed it during the pandemic.
So it's interesting you say it because there was this old kind of idea that you would when you were in the office, it was just too much distraction, too much going on, and co-workers would come and grab you and and chat to you at the coffee machine and the water cooler, and we used to say, oh, I need to work from home to focus, but
Yeah.
it sounds like it's the reverse of that. We've got so many distractions at home with the Amazon shopping and the children and the partners and the spouses and all the rest of it that I must go back into the office. It's too much, going on at home. Is this
Yeah.
true?
It's really interesting that you say that because we've recently completed a workplace survey. It was a global one actually, but our UK survey was about 2,000 respondents. And we found during the pandemic just a couple of years ago that exactly as you said, everyone wanted to come in to socialize, they wanted to be connected to the brand, they wanted visibility to leadership, all the things we missed during lockdown. But
Right.
this past year, we saw this big shift, big surprise. What we saw was that everybody wanted to come into focus. That was number one. And this was almost universal across the different countries, actually. So it wasn't just the UK.
Right. Okay. So,
And
but again, a place is set up for this, or what spaces
yes,
do you need for that? Because it's not the kind of general open plan. There's a beautiful image actually on the blog that you put out on Monday. I'll put a link in the description if people want to check that out. But of this, it almost looks like a lounge. I mean, it's like
yeah,
couches or sofas and big screen, and it looks like a beautiful lounge I'd like at home, not in an office. Is that a focus area or?
that's a great question. We actually found that if you look at the offices post pandemic, so many companies went back to saying we need spaces for socialization because this is what people tell us they want. And so the focus areas are actually least supported amongst all the different space types in offices, which means there's a huge design opportunity for people to put those spaces back in. But to your point, Neil, I think focus can look a little bit different for different types of people. For some people, it's about focusing on your own, having a pod, an enclosed room, acoustic privacy, ability to control lighting, really great tech, of course. For other people, it's about being with your team and
Right.
having a project room, having that set aside space where you can really be in the environment of your work rather than being standalone work. So I think we get under the skin of our clients and try to understand what their employees need to be successful, and that's what focus is for them.
Okay, and again, this change has evolved through I think it was 2016 was when you started to track hybrid working or remote working
That's right.
in the review, and then obviously now that must have radically changed, through the pandemic and now afterwards as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We started to track virtual work, which has grown as you might expect. But what's interesting is that people who report working alone, so without any interaction, virtual or in person, that proportion's actually decreased.
Okay.
So I loved seeing in our numbers that people are actually collaborating more than ever. People are working together in either a virtual or an in-person setting more than ever. And here's my other favorite number. Socializing, learning, and professional growth, those numbers have doubled since
Really?
2016. Yeah,
Okay.
so people have come back and they want to learn, they want to teach, they want to be part of a whole string of mentorship and the socialization that comes along with it. And that's really fun because it means there's a real engagement with the office and engagement with that face-to-face learning, which we love.
And clearly there must be a divide. Again, I was reading through some of the work, and some of it talks about sort of innovators, or the companies that are more innovative, and the high performance companies are obviously embracing this stuff and obviously getting a lot out of it, versus the companies that maybe aren't so focused on this, or maybe it's not a big thing for them. There is this divide between these two types of organizations. What can I guess the innovators and the adopters are kind of there and probably quite advanced in this. But what can some of the other companies that are kind of interested in embracing this and looking at this? I mean, how do you go about kind of advising them? What should they look at and start to do? Is it Taco Tuesdays? That's Craig would say.
It's really interesting because one of the most important things, rather than any specific amenity like a great coffee shop or a wellness room, those are all important. But what's really important is the variety of different spaces. And that's where we really see innovators setting themselves apart, that they have lots of different spaces for all the tasks you might do throughout the day, all the different types of people who might need to do those tasks, as well as just creating an environment that gives you the opportunity and the autonomy to choose where you want to work at any given part of the day. And if you look at the relationship between variety of spaces and people who say they want to come into the office, we saw this really interesting statistic that people would come in one day extra a week. 25% of people would come in an extra day a week if they had that right variety, that right mix of spaces. And the same number again would come in full time if they had that right mix of spaces. So it can really move the needle to provide the right kinds of environments for your employees.
And what about, again, we touched on it briefly earlier. You mentioned about the different geographies in different countries. I was talking to someone in Germany the other day, and they were, and it actually blew my mind because I didn't realize that they still have that kind of clock in, clock out, and the amount of time that they have to put, if they are a staff member, they have to, have that 40-hour a week, and it's quite strict, because I mean, for me, they have this kind of thing in my contract that this is your working time, but it's very flexible, and I generally work into the evenings with people in North America, and for us in Britain I think it is, and maybe in North America it's quite flexible, but again there are some countries where it is more strict. There's a lot more unionization, a lot more kind of rules around how that happens. Again, do you see something different in those geographies around some of these trends and this way of working?
It's really interesting because we've just released that global workplace survey, and again I can send you the link
We'll link it
for you
below.
in the
If
comments.
people want to watch it,
Perfect.
we'll definitely link it for people to go and have a look at, for sure.
That's great. And I think the thing that surprised us the most across these 9 different countries, all regions, was how alike they were.
Right.
We expected to see a lot of variation depending on culture, depending on what people's experience was during lockdown, depending on people's commutes and what their home environments are likely to be like. We didn't really see that bear through in the data. We were
Right.
seeing a lot of consistency in what people were asking for. And I think, to your point, Neil, that's because people are working borderlessly. People have similar expectations. Talent has the same expectations, kind of regardless of industry or where they might be working at that time. So it was fascinating to see that these are pretty consistent trends.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of real estate that's now vacant. Again, there was another piece I was reading about the amount, and I think North America is probably a big one for this. There's towns that are like ghost towns. I think Manhattan's got so many hundreds of thousands of square feet of empty offices at the moment. What do we do with these places now? What do we do with them? What's your kind of advice? Do we museums, or should we make it into like
the office of the 20th century?
Yeah.
No, it's a really great question, and as you can imagine, lots of people are thinking about this. I think the first question we ask ourselves when we're dealing with a developer or an owner of these spaces is, what's the quality of that space? Is it, for example, does it have a high EPC rating, and therefore it's actually very well suited to adaptation for future use? We're seeing a flight to quality amongst our clients and tenants across all industries who really care about things like the environmental performance of their space. And so we need to have a good understanding of what stock is out there that is well positioned for BREEAM, that's well positioned for WELL, that is in a good position to really set people up for their carbon goals. And then we do ask the question of, what's the best use of this space? Is this the best space for office? Can it be resi? We've developed an office to resi tool to help us
Right.
look at the opportunity of putting residential in some of these buildings. Could it be for sciences? We also have been part of a constructing sciences consortium that is developing a series of guidelines to evaluate whether labs of different kinds could be suitable. So I think we have to be open to the idea that let's think about the quality of the building and then what it's best suited for. And then we can think about the long-term growth of that space. But in general, we love the idea of refitting in place, bringing something back to life, rather than recommending that we build new buildings from scratch
Yeah.
or knock things down. I think there's a lot of existing quality and character in the building stock that we love to bring to life.
It's so true of London. I mean, again, London, joke, London's still in beta. One day it'll get
Yes.
finished. It's just always building stuff going. But there's some amazing buildings, and they just rip them down and put something, new walkie-talkie building or whatever it is that they're putting in there. And it just, I mean, some of that real estate, there's nothing wrong with it. Why not adapt it and reuse it and repurpose it and all the rest of it? I guess if there is that ability to do so, we don't need to have all shiny and new sometimes, but I guess.
Absolutely. And from a carbon perspective,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
as we start to track embodied carbon, there's so many gains to be had, generically speaking, from working with what we have already, especially in London. So that is always the starting point.
And again, are people being more attuned to that now? As I say, the kind of recycle and reuse and the carbon. I mean, there was always that kind of green initiative of, we had it in the video world of like, cut down on your travel, use video conferencing instead, and never really kind of took flight. But is that really a growth area now? People putting this 2030 goal that the government's obviously put on net zero and carbon zero, is that really starting to gain traction in the workplace?
It really is. I think it's a major driver, and especially as we start to look beyond our current ways of tracking into scope 3 emissions, we do have to think about things like commute. We do have to think about where our assets are coming from. And this is, again, asking us to reach farther back into the decision-making process and make sure that we've got the right buildings in the right locations, the right size of portfolio. And then what we do in that space has to be really considered. And everything that we build needs to think about the end of life or how it might transform in future, which is a great challenge for us. We are working much more closely with our supply chain to really understand the embodied carbon and the end of life plans for most of the materials that we use on a day-to-day basis. And as a design firm, we are very conscious as well that we're responsible for a large portion of carbon emissions globally. So we've committed to do whatever we can across our portfolio. We've committed to get our portfolio to net zero by 2030, which means
Wow.
everything
Okay.
we build, 1.5 billion square feet, needs to get
Goodness.
there. So yeah, we're taking seriously the responsibility to move the supply chain, as well as develop some of the tools we're going to need to get there.
Fascinating. Again, you blew us all away with your presentation in Madrid at the Modern Work Summit. I'm so pleased that you've come on. Definitely want to get you back to go into more details. But for everyone watching, where can they find out more information about this? I guess it's Gensler's website, and where can people hook up with you? Are you on social and all that kind of good stuff?
I am. I'm reluctantly on LinkedIn. I've taken to it in the last year. So do find me on LinkedIn. And of course, Gensler.com has a lot of research, a lot of blogs and insights that hopefully will be helpful to your viewers.
That's fantastic. Naomi, thank you ever so much for joining us on CresTV today.
Thank you, Neil.
And thank you all for tuning in. Fascinating. Again, Naomi did an amazing presentation. We all loved it. She was definitely one of our favourites at the Modern Work Summit. So it's great to have her on. But there's some amazing, and this stuff is free. You can go and read. The blog she put out on Monday is brilliant. The workplace survey that they've done, all that information is online. We'll link it up in the description, or go to Gensler.com. Go and check that out. Go and learn more about this stuff. Understand the way in which the workplace is going and the way that we need to change and adapt. It's not just about tech. Again, we make some great tech, but it's more than that. It's the way in which human beings need to connect, need to work, and need to change in the way that we do this in the future. So go check that out. Thanks for watching. We do this every Thursday. Subscribe, ring the bell, tell your friends to join us, and we will catch you back here for the next update from us here at CresTV.